Anybody needs a coffee refill, now would be a good time. Kenzie, I think your puppy should be our guest speaker in the afternoon. He's very cute.
Thank you. He has an issue of not leaving my side.
Tara, they can be joined by your kitty.
Okay, hey Lynn.
Yes.
Hold on one sec. Clearly a problem. Okay, is that better? I just shared that document with you on Drive. If you don't mind opening it up, I can't get it to work. So at least
No problem.
we'll have something to follow along with. Okay, so while she pulls that up, I see a few more people coming in, or maybe they're getting bounced off like I was and then coming back.
It's up in a shared screen. So you just tell me when you want the slide forwarded and we'll make it go.
That's kind
It's
of annoying.
fine.
All right, so if you want to just go ahead to slide 2, I just want to welcome everybody to HTS, and then in slide 4, we'll talk about part 1. I've divided this training into several parts so that you guys have a break. I don't know if you guys are familiar with literature out there about how many minutes one person can pay attention and actually pick up on new learning. Do you guys have any guess? That will be trivia question number 2. So send that in the chat. How many minutes do you think somebody can pay attention and actually absorb what they're talking about? Oh, somebody got it already. 2 people got it. 3 people got it. 4. Nice. It's 20 minutes. That's about all we can handle. It's 20 minutes as human beings here. So I don't know what to think about that, if that has to do with social media and how we're bouncing around all day long multitasking, or if this has always been that way. But what we're going to do is try to separate these things into sections, and hopefully the sections make some sense in terms of organization to you. And the first part is really just giving you guys an overview, an introduction of HTS, the team members, our services, and making sure that I'm available to answer any questions, but also your requirements as a professional working for HTS. And that does get a little more in depth as we get through this. So there's quite a few slides. We'll go ahead to the next one, and we'll start with part 1. One more. All right. So who are we? I think people might have different descriptions for us, but I thought it would be helpful to share with you a little bit of the history and how we came together. Right now, HTS, our focus really is and always has been providing a range of services for specifically our specialty area of autism, but we also branch outside of that. So we serve individuals with, developmental disabilities who don't have autism, as well as mental or behavioral health disorders. And mostly those individuals are served through our outpatient or through our waiver services. However, we also see that our kids with autism, or our adults with autism, now I got to stop calling them just kids, but our adults and children with autism typically have an additional diagnosis. So we may be working with dual diagnosis when we're actually in practice. Dr. Hoagland and I worked together back in the year 2000. And then in 2002, we decided to open up a center-based facility in Ohio. It was the first of its kind. The reason that we did that was because they were limiting waiver services. In fact, so much so that the counties had announced, and at that time it was primarily Franklin County that was providing waivers to individuals with autism, had announced that the funding sources were going away. And so there was this huge panic in the community, and we were kind of coming together as different team members that had seen each other in practice or in the community, or worked, collaboratively within offices and such. And we said, okay, we can't do this. Where are all the kids going to go? And so we decided that we'd open up a center-based program, and we opened that up in 2002. And then over time, each of us went our own ways to focus on our specialty areas, mine being specifically autism and intervention, getting my BCBA and, going on and obtaining, extra schooling and those sorts of things, while Dr. Hoagland did the same thing, getting his BCBA, as well as really focusing on the Morningside model, which is out of Seattle. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it is a direct relation to the direct instruction program that HLC implements for their academics. And one thing that we maintain similarity on is that we believe anyone with a diagnosis should still have the same opportunity to learn and grow as any other student in school. And so we didn't want a diagnosis to be an excuse for progress and for learning. And so it was about 2013, maybe 2012 in the fall, we started talking again about combining forces, because what he was finding is that here he's serving this, population of students that primarily have autism, again, and working on education and academics, while at the same time I'm working on intervention over here, but neither of us are really meeting the whole needs of the client. And so I am a huge supporter of the direct instruction model. I think that it works incredibly well for the majority of the kids that I work with. And so we decided, instead of me specializing in that or learning something new and him learning all of the, intensive stuff, that we would join forces again. And we created Hoagland Therapy Services. And so the goal being, though, that we wouldn't just be a center-based program, but we would be available in the community, in schools, in homes, in workplaces for individuals. And we would be able to provide services really anywhere that an individual would need. So if it were to, start a, say, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old who is newly diagnosed in treatment, it might be a focus on partial in-home or all in-home, or partial in center base like the AIC, or all at the AIC, in order to start implementing, the intensive intervention following the literature of 30 to 40 hours a week, those sorts of things. While he would also then utilize our team in his HLC building. So that's how we ended up growing and providing services in all these different locations throughout this state. So technically, we are pretty much always in the community when we're providing our services. It's either at AIC, or it's at an HLC branch, or we have, like, Cindy is out in Zanesville at a school and she provides services there. And so it just depends on who you are and where you are and what you want to do, but we're here to, help get those services out to all these different areas where they really don't have a lot of expertise or trained professionals in working with the population that we specialize in. So along with that, though, is our outpatient. And that includes something that we knew there was a high need for, and that is diagnostics and testing, and then even counseling. So we have that outpatient facility housed in Billingsley, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So that is who HTS is in terms of how we became and where we are today. So moving on to the next slide, we have our leadership team. So I have 2 slides here breaking this down for you. I'm pretty much the primary managing partner in terms of I'm involved on a day-to-day basis in helping management and other leadership staff, really implement everything that we're trying to accomplish, and trying to problem solve funding sources and understand law and changes in those laws as they happen. And then there's my partner, Jason Ramage, and not many people probably know about him, but because he kind of like floats in the background, but he runs all of the business end of things. And so when you're talking about bills and getting buildings ready and all those sorts of things, that's what he takes care of for us. And then of course we have Dr. Hogland, who's in the periphery and out there talking about our program to help educate the community and make sure that people know we exist and what we're here for. Next in line, though, is Lynn. Lynn Dudek is a godsend, and I am so honored to have her on our team. For those of you who don't know, we've known each other for a very long time, and our paths have crossed multiple times. And then eventually, after much begging on my part, and that's kind of joking there, but just going out to her and saying, really, I want to team up with you. I really think she's a fantastic clinician. I think she is the best speech pathologist I've ever met. And you'll see a bunch of letters after her name, and we joke around with her. How many more are you going to add? And how many more, frames do you need on your wall? Because we're all just a little jealous. But she is very well educated, and she has her MBA, as well as, even though starting in the speech world, went on, got her MBA as well as her BCBA. So out of all of our team members, she really can help manage all of our clinical operations extremely well. And I personally can't live without this lady, and I don't think you guys could either, even if you don't know it. So she's a great resource, and we are so lucky to have her. Mindy Owens, she is our HR director. If you have not met her yet, I know that she will be available and is, hopping around to different teams to introduce herself and ask questions about what staff members' goals are within our agency, as well as what their needs are, so that we can keep growing our HR, services to make them easily accessible, as well as a resource for you. You really, I mean, that is part of the title, human resources, and you really should see it as a resource. So anytime that you have questions about, say, payroll or time off policies, anything really in the employee handbook, this would be the person to go to. And she joined our team in November. So we welcome her, and she's been a great addition. And then next is Tiffany Waltz. And I don't know if all of you have had the pleasure of meeting her, but she started years ago with me as a behavior technician and had really shown some excellent management leadership skills, as well as a just a motivation and passion for understanding literature and how we apply it in terms of our treatment. So she decided to go on and go to school. She got her BCBA, and then she's been a director at several facilities along the way, including the AIC, actually. And then we promoted her recently, I would say in the fall, I think, or no, I think it was August of last year. We promoted her to the director of staff development. The goal for her position right now, in terms of how you guys will utilize her, is to help organize days like this, and also identify through managers and your feedback, what training needs are there across the entire agency. And it may be department specific, which means then she would work with that department manager in, say, a scope of practice that she doesn't actually practice, but also to develop our initial training, our RBT training, eventually, as well as our consultant training and our BCBA training. And I mean, this girl, I think she would be a forever student. I tease her about that all the time. If she could, she'd just be in school all of her life, because she loves learning and sharing then all of that information and transferring that technology to the team members. So that is the first set of our core team. The second set of our core team here, and again, not in any specific order, is Trevor Simmons. He is our behavioral health supervisor. He runs the outpatient clinic over at Billingsley, which includes some of the services I talked about, like diagnostic testing and counseling and those sorts of things. And Becca Peck, she is our clinical therapies manager. She worked under Lynn for a while, and then when Lynn was promoted to the director of clinical operations, she was the perfect choice for this management position, and she is doing an excellent job. And if you wonder how she impacts your life every day, she's really out there looking at, what do the kids need, and are we able to provide it? And if not, how do we create it? How do we make that happen? So she's been instrumental, along with Lynn and some others like Joe, in making sure that we find ways to get speech therapy in Athens, and we find ways to get that in Sandusky, or speech and OT maybe at Lancaster. It's very, very hard, given all of the rules around speech and OT, because those are considered medical services, and there's a lot of restrictions, or there was prior to COVID, a lot of restrictions in how those services can be delivered. So some of that has loosened up and really allowed us to reach more people in areas of the state that really have very little access to services because of COVID. So if there's one thing we can thank COVID for, it would be expanding our ability to reach people in areas where literally they have no contact with people. Many don't even have internet, and we're helping them, establish internet so that they can get access. So Becca does a lot of that work on the back end, as well as training and such on her team. Brittany Baird, she runs our intensive behavior intervention team, IBIT. I should have put that in parentheses next to it, so if anyone sees it, they'll recognize it. She's a clinical supervisor who is also a BCBA and COBA. And she actually came from HLC originally, and went on and obtained her BCBA, and then joined my practice at ABS for a little bit of time before I created HTS with Dr. Hogland. So for many of you, she has been helping navigate really the possibility of actually providing service during this crazy, crazy time that I pray that we will never have to visit again once this is all under control, but making sure that people have materials that they need and you know, dropping them off at the main building for pickup. And I think even sometimes going to people's homes to help get access to their PPE so that they could go into the homes during this COVID period and continue to provide some one-on-one support for those individuals to either attend school or attend therapies like speech and those sorts of things. So before COVID, she ran the program really over at the HLC New Market building for all of the one-on-one support services that were either in pullout or mainly in push-in in the classrooms. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So Samantha Clegg, she is our Autism Intervention Center or AIC director. She became the director. She was the assistant director for quite some time and then moved up to director in August. And she also has her master's in behavior analysis and has worked with me. Honestly, it was just by pure luck. She had a family member who knew we were around and said, hey, I think you should check this out. And then ever since, she fell in love with what we do and the kids that we serve, and went on and got her master's in ABA and those sorts of things. So yeah, she's just been fantastic from the beginning, and we're so lucky to have her too. Jordan Martin, now she's someone that's relatively new to most people because she was isolated at the East location for HLC. So similarly to Brittany's program over at New Market of providing one-on-one support within the classrooms, she started at East. Gosh, this would have been the last school year, right? So let's see, that would have been 2009.
January 2020.
Was it January?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you were helping out though way more than that prior. So to be fair, I really think it was probably right when they opened. But the East location of HLC is an education program really identical to the HLC New Market, you know, model. And they have students that really needed support and toilet training and some things like that. And so she really seemed like a great fit because also, I don't know if you've noticed what's after her name, but she has an MED. So it's such a perfect blend, sort of like, you know, when I talk about Lynn having all of these other, you know, management and ABA and speech. And so she understands literally every aspect of a company and how, you know, we need to run to provide services. Jordan understands the education part, how to meet state education requirements and then also make that or embed that within our ABA, because we know, and she believes as well, that intensive intervention is necessary, but it also needs to fade over time. And we need to, you know, try to accomplish the ultimate goal, right? Which is to have individuals participating in class in school. And I don't care what school you go to or what, you know, job you have, but participating at their highest level of independence and success. And so helping us, I think, move into that education realm a little bit more is going to be instrumental in our relationships with school districts. We do have the Autism Scholarship, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But with that, we've got really IEPs that come to us that aren't always appropriate for the kids. And so we end up having to work on goals that aren't in the IEP more often than not. And so we're hoping that with her participation and guidance, we'll be able to give further guidance to districts to help write better IEPs, but they'll hopefully be more open to it, number one, because of her background in education, but also because she knows how to then link those things to their language and the way that they look at how, you know, students need to progress through their education over the years. So really, really excited about that. We've just, I would say, recently gotten started on making that happen. And we've worked on one classroom, and I can't even say we, but she's worked on one classroom with the team trying to get this started. And once we work out all the kinks, we'll start to apply this to all of our classrooms over at the AIC specifically, and then we can guide others through their community services and branches if that is needed and appropriate. So it's been a really great addition. I'm super excited about where that's headed. Adrienne Marshall, she's not here today, I don't think. She is she's not feeling too well, and we hope that she's getting better, but she is our waiver coordinator, and she started as a behavior technician as well over at, I think, the HLC New Market building, if I remember correctly. And she comes with a whole history of experience in the developmental disability world. So having worked for other waiver providers and facilities like day hab facilities, she has this great knowledge and a plethora of connections within the different county boards. So that's been super helpful in helping our families get access to services outside of school and outside of our intervention programs or therapies. So basically in the evenings and getting respite. It's not called that, and we'll talk about that as we go through too, but really connecting families with the funding sources that their specific county board of DD has available for them, and then making sure that we're there to support getting staff in there if that's what needs to happen, or whatnot. But it's definitely a challenge, I think, for waiver services because number one, they don't pay real well. So it's very, very hard to find staff that are fantastic and will stick with it. And I know she's built that team and is very proud of that. But in addition, we have 88 counties in the state of Ohio, and literally every single county runs it differently. They have the autonomy to implement services or resources as they choose. So you can't live in Franklin County and expect to move to Delaware County and have the exact same services carry over because they may not exist over there. Similarly, she works with a lot of counties outside of, our main Columbus area, a couple of hours up north and such. And they don't even have what we have here because this is either new to them or they just don't have the resources because each county is also funded by the taxes within that county. So you can imagine the counties that have more tax dollars are going to have more services typically is how it ends up working and whatnot. But if you've ever wondered when you go to vote, if you've ever wondered what those programs are where they're saying, we want to get, money for a DD program, that's what they're asking you to vote on. And it's those funds that really pay for, some of those services that our individuals get to access, before and after school or work. So, and in some cases at work too. So she's got a lot on her plate to make that happen. Dawn Nichols is our accounting coordinator, and she is responsible for probably one of the most important jobs, not that one is more important than the other, I suppose, but making sure that all of our billing is processed so that we can continue to stay open and provide service. So every note that you guys fill out for a progress note or a service note, whatever you want to call them, she is the one responsible for making sure that it processes correctly and that we're collecting on that, and then making sure that our processes are working well. And so sometimes you guys may hear from her specifically when you get married, or if you change your name for any reason. Maybe you also just graduated from, say, a higher level of education. All of that information needs to feed over to her department so that she can update your credentials for all of the insurance companies as required, and also make sure that it's updated with Medicaid and those sorts of things. So you may hear from her if she needs some extra supporting documents. She'll help people get their NPIs established, which is required in order for you to provide any Medicaid services. So it's definitely something that we can thank her for literally every day, because without her, we would not be able to stay and continue to do what we do. So that is really the overview of our leadership team, our core leadership team. So thank you for listening to that. I think what we'll do when I send this out is I actually have pictures to pair with this so that you guys will have a reference. And we'll do some question answer, like, why would you need to talk to this person? And we can give you guys some of those, reference materials to help you remember in the future. Something that I wanted to cover about HTS is our certifications. It is complicated. One of our goals, if you remember, was to provide a variety of services in a lot of locations. Well, with that, that means we also have to learn and work within a variety of funding sources. So often we will not combine them and provide them at the same time, but we will work within all the different funding sources that people have in order to get them the most comprehensive treatment program available. So one of the departments that governs us is the Department of Developmental Disabilities. We are a DD waiver provider, or a DODD waiver provider, and that has its own set of rules that we have to follow. Then we are also governed by the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, so OMHAS. And that has an entirely different set of rules and is actually just as intense in terms of what those rules are. And sometimes they don't actually match. So this makes HR very difficult. It makes compliance sometimes, difficult as well. And we try to work through that. But those two are probably the ones that we're going to run into the most, because those are our primary services. You're either providing a waiver service usually, or you're providing a mental health service under Medicaid. And the mental health services that we provide, we'll talk about as we go, but those two can't necessarily always happen at the same time. They can in certain cases, but we have to be very clear what service it is that we're providing, because I can be a provider for both. So I can work with a child and provide those DD services like homemaker personal care, which is just helping them out in the home and such. But at the same time, I am trained to provide mental health services. So I need to really know as a professional, which service am I providing, because those have different sets of rules in terms of documentation, in terms of what you can work on, and in terms of their treatment plan. So each of them have their own treatment plan. And unfortunately, you'll find that a lot in the state of Ohio. I don't know how it works in other states, but I can tell you that in Ohio, we have silos of services. And I know as a Medicaid department, they are working very hard to make that easier and cross over, I guess, more consistently, but that doesn't always happen. So we have lots of different notes that you might have to take. And in fact, remember how I said there's 88 counties? Well, you might have a specific documentation note that you have to take for Franklin County versus what you have to take for Delaware County. And imagine possibly 88 different notes. Thank goodness we're not at that point. But yeah, so that's how complicated it can get. And I would just say to the whole team, because this is primarily what we provide, if you are one of those providers and you are trained in both of these areas, make sure you talk to your supervisor if you ever have any questions about what service am I providing, and is my documentation meeting the requirements for each of those services, so that we are as protected as possible for future audits. And one of the things that I'll add as a note to that is, our documentation is actually not just protecting the company from an audit perspective, but it protects the client. The client isn't going to be able to continue to receive services unless our documentation can reflect medical necessity for these two areas of service. So if our documentation isn't good enough, then we need to be working on it, make it better, but also know that that means it may not demonstrate enough evidence that this particular client needs us. And that will impact their new treatment plan every single year. So documentation for those things is crucial. It protects each client's right to access to services. And I see that as a very big responsibility. And most people don't think of documentation that way. They're like just thinking, okay, I got to write down what we did today kind of thing to prove I did my job. That's really not what it's about. It's about being able to share information that anyone can walk in and get a snapshot of, here's what's going on with this client and why they need this service. So keep that in mind, just a side note. We also are a professional medical group. Sorry,
Oh.
Lynn.
Hey,
We're
so,
still, yes.
sorry, I'm like, one person had a question. They wanted to know, like, are all of our services provided through Medicaid, or do we provide services through private insurance companies as well?
We do, and that's our next one. So we do provide services through private insurance companies, or commercial insurance is sometimes how we'll refer to it. And that actually doesn't require any specific certification. So you're not going to see, say, a specific governing body that manages all of that. It's going to be based on each insurance company. So we have different rules. And for the most part, I do need, I can say that the commercial insurance companies have moved really, they've done a really good job moving to a system that everyone follows that's the same. Just even a year ago, people were not using the same codes for the same service. So it really depends on what insurance company you're talking about in terms of what documentation they needed and what kind of authorizations they needed. So it was very, very complex, but they've done a good job of trying to streamline some of those things, especially within our field of autism treatment specifically. And we really answer to each and every one of those. So United Healthcare, Anthem, I could keep going, Medical Mutual, there's OSU, CoreSource, I think is what they're called. And, so there's a whole list of those. But something to know is that commercial insurance plans are specific to that client. It, depending upon where they get those insurance plans, whether it be the marketplace or their employer or their parents, employer, whatnot, each plan has its own rules and list of services they cover and services they don't. So even though you may have a diagnosis for something, your plan specifically may not cover treatment or specific treatments for that particular diagnosis. And that's something to just be aware of, and is another reason that Dawn's team is really important to us, because we feed her all of that information in the beginning and say, please tell me, what all does their plan cover, so that we can have a conversation with those families and those clients so that they can determine where to go from there, and if they can move forward with treatment services and accessing their insurance to pay for them. The other thing to know is that commercial insurance companies sometimes require that you become part of their network formally or on their board of licensed providers. And I'll give you an example that's easy to visualize, but our speech therapy team, we have a ton of speech therapists. They're all qualified. They can all provide services. However, specifically in the Columbus area, the commercial insurance companies believe that we have enough speech therapists in their networks, and so they don't need more. And that means that it limits choice of provider for those particular families, depending upon what plan they have. So our speech pathologists may not be in network, not because we don't want to be perhaps, but because it's not an open network for us to join. And that will often happen really across all of the state and all the plans that I've seen working in Cincinnati and, the Dayton area, as well as Columbus area. So there are a lot of differences as it relates to commercial insurance, and each one being individual, we have to look at them individually before we can determine what we're allowed to do, what's covered, and what's not. And then you've got this other part. I don't know if you guys ever look at your insurance plan, options and what it covers, but sometimes insurance companies have out-of-network benefits. Most don't, but some do. And then that adds another layer of, complexity to it. And in addition, something to know though, is that as a DD waiver provider and a community mental health agency, those are Medicaid services. It is our responsibility and a requirement for us to always access their commercial insurance first, and Medicaid is the last payer of resort. So we can't just jump to Medicaid services because we want to necessarily. We always have to go through their commercial insurance policy initially, and then we have to file claims through there. So you might have clients, I know we have had clients that will contact you and ask, oh, hey, I just got something in the mail that says I have this huge bill, and it says that it's not covering it. If you ever run into anything like that, go to your supervisor, because they should know and have been trained on what to look for and when to forward that information to our billing department and work with Dawn. Really, that may just be their primary insurance, which is their commercial, saying, no, we don't cover it. But then that allows us to bill their secondary insurance, which is Medicaid. And not everybody who has Medicaid has a primary commercial insurance policy, and not everybody who has commercial insurance has Medicaid. So, qualifying for Medicaid, there are lots of, well, not lots, but there are several different criteria that can be met in order to access Medicaid as a paying source. So very complex, but that's why you don't see commercial insurance on here, but I'll definitely add that in the future just for clarity's sake. The last thing that I want to mention is our autism scholarship, and you can go ahead and move forward, Lynn, because it actually is where I start in the next one. We are an approved autism scholarship program provider. And what that means is we are allowed to provide IEP services to a student in lieu of them going to school, for example, if they wanted to come to the Autism Intervention Center or the AIC. And we can actually serve them in their entire school year, working on those IEP goals, and then communicate with the district in terms of collaborating on the IEP for the next year, or when appropriate, transitioning those students, back to district if that seems to make sense. So you cannot just randomly work on IEP services without being approved through the Department of Education, and that's who governs those services. So then going back to all of these different, rules that I referenced throughout our trainings, we have yet another governing body and another hat that we wear through the ASP. So I'm going to just summarize real quickly here the overview of our services. We have our ASP, which right now we provide either in the home for some students, and that's pretty rare, but really the primary program for that is the AIC. And the AIC serves children of all ages now. We have expanded, so we can start serving students from the age of 3, because that's the earliest that they can access an IEP, up to the age of their 21st birthday or 22nd birthday. So through 21, I believe, is how it works. So that would be the Autism Scholarship Program. Our community mental health support services, like I mentioned earlier, we provide them in schools and homes, in the community. Things like restaurants, so community outings, some of those life skills, going to the grocery store, become very important, or even in workplace settings, as well as in centers like the AIC, which is an autism scholarship provider. We provide ABA intensive treatment programs. That is your one-on-one that we really try to follow the literature on, and is overseen by the BCBAs. We have speech therapy, we have occupational therapy, and we have waiver services. So I think this is a great time. It's probably been way over 20 minutes. I will have everyone just take a breather. You can turn your camera off. You have 5 minutes, and we will see you. That puts us, why don't we just say at 10 a.m. Does that look right? So 6 minutes, and I'll see you back to go over some of the details. Thanks.
Oh, holy crap.
Did you get that? Did you take a look, Lynn?
Eh, 79, honey.
Right, right.
It's okay. You could do it.
Sure. Sounds great.
30 seconds a slide. You could do it. And I don't know if you stopped or started recording again.
It's recording again. We'll have to just cut this piece out. All right, so let's see. Okay, I'm going to get started again. All right, welcome back. I had to like drink a gallon of water quickly. I talk too much, so that won't change. Here we go. All right, let's just make sure that I list through all the services that we provide. I think I've talked about them as I've gone along, with the exception of a few things. So I want to make sure everyone knows some of the things that we do, and that way you can better refer clients as well as identify in your actual cases. You can say to yourself, okay, something's off and I'm going to go talk to my supervisor, whatnot, but maybe even consider, do we need to look at any of these other services that our agency provides in order to help either improve the situation or maybe look into things further? And the best example I can think of is, say, our 6 or 7 year old child who has been receiving intensive treatment through through our program of the 30 to 40 hours a week, and they're not making the progress that I would expect. That would be a flag to me to say, hey, I think we need to potentially talk to a psychologist and get them to look at the case, more specifically, as well as identify whether or not we should be looking for any other diagnosis, so that I know I'm following the best treatment practice for that particular kiddo. So that would be one example. And our behavioral health services, like I said, do include the diagnostic evaluations. We have psychological testing that kind of fits within that for most cases. Psychotherapy is what everyone labels it now. Some people still call it counseling. Something else you'll find in our field is that people like to change the language on us. And so you'll find that we have to update forms literally because the rules change and they move from using the word counseling to the word psychotherapy, over time. So sometimes those things do happen. And for that, we have individual, family, and group counseling. Trevor, am I missing anything there? I'm not sure if he's back, but anyway, I don't think so. We also provide 2 other services that are really helpful to our population that we serve. And the first is community psychiatric supportive treatment. Again, I don't want anybody to memorize this information, but you should know that that is one of our top services that we provide, as well as therapeutic behavioral services, or what we call TBS. So CPST and TBS are probably what most people are trained on if you are providing mental health services in a classroom, because you're supporting a child to be able to access their education, or you're in the home and you're under, say, a behavior consultant, or you're at the AIC. These are actually different services, and your documentation needs to reflect that as well. So as we go through our review of what our company does, and kind of a reorientation, so to speak, those who provide these 2 services will receive additional training outside of this in order to talk about what are they and how do they differ, how are they the same, because there is overlap. and also who's allowed to provide them. Your education background plays a significant role. Your experience plays a significant role. If you don't have the level of education or experience that they require, then you may not be eligible to provide therapeutic behavioral services or TBS. And that's super important in terms of knowing how you can serve your clients and meet those ISP goals. The other behavioral health service that we will primarily provide is intensive behavior intervention. And we do that both in homes and center-based programs like the AIC. That just means in general that students or clients are receiving 10 to 30 hours a week of one-on-one. In most cases, that one-on-one is going to be in a pull-out format if it is in a school. And you'll be working on very specific treatment plan goals that individual needs to, work on and establish in terms of their learning. Or you would be really just getting all services like this and not accessing an education program because you're doing 30 hours of intensive. So you might see that too. And you'll see that the hours tend to decrease as individuals get older, but that isn't always the case. There may be instances where medical necessity increases due to some variables, say in the home or COVID. That would be a good example. And now they don't have access to school and, their whole routine is messed up. So it really just depends on the need. And those treatment plans typically run for 6-month periods. I think we only have one insurance company. This is usually funded by commercial insurance, although Medicaid does now pay for ABA programs. But they typically approve a treatment plan for a 6-month period, other than one, which I think does a year now. And that's slightly different than the treatment goals then that we work on under CPST and TBS. So they're two different treatment plans, and you may then be looking at some overlaps and those sorts of things. And so there are some staff members who are going to be trained on all three of these services, and you'll have to know which one you're providing when. And again, make sure you're following the documentation requirements for each one. So I do have psychosocial rehab listed on there, and you don't have to back up, but psychosocial rehab is not actually something that we provide as an agency right now. However, we are approved and certified to provide it. So at some point we may expand into that area, and I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that. Other services, we talked about the Autism Scholarship Program. That's working on the IEP goals and objectives, and then any additional goals that we feel are necessary. We do have some flexibility with that. We have medical treatment and therapies such as speech and OT. And then we have developmental disability services under the DODD department and the local county board of DDs. And that includes homemaker personal care, which is HPC. You might hear that term. And a lot of people in the community refer to this as respite. It's not really an equal definition when people think of respite versus HPC, but the goal really is to provide oversight, make sure that the individual is safe, they have access to all of their needs being met, like eating, sleeping, their laundry is clean, they are self-managing their daily living skills, really. And that's really the goal of HPC. And it can then also be used as a respite for, say, the parent. And that's why I think initially a lot of people called it respite, is that, hey, do you want some respite so you can go to the grocery store? I'm here, and I can take care of your kiddo for a while. And these services across the whole board are actually available to mainly all ages. It used to be that ABA, for example, was not available, that one-on-one intensive, to adults. It was only to a certain age. And we've actually had some adults now get ABA approved in terms of those services on their benefit plan. And that's amazing. I never thought I'd see the day. DD services, again, you can start at 3 years, but then it can go all the way into adulthood. And that's primarily what Adrian focuses on. And in addition, as part of our DD services, we can provide transportation. There is typically a small amount of dollars that families will set aside to help with transportation needs to and from therapies, and that can be billed to their waiver, and we are a provider of that service. So some things that are specific by county under the DD program or services is behavior consultation and support. So this would be your behavior consultants or your BCBAs. The only county in the entire state that provides this service and funding for it is Franklin County. So that is very, very unique. Also, you can obtain a functional behavior assessment or an FBA through those behavior consultation services. And Delaware County has expanded, and now we are a contractor for them, and now will pay for an FBA for individuals when there is medical need to do so. And that's new over the last probably 4 or 5 years, you know, in terms of what I've been seeing, but it is always going to be county specific. I wanted to make sure everyone understands our service locations. This is super important. We are a certified mental health agency, and we are an autism scholarship provider, and we're a DD provider. And those are, say, our top 3, right? But each one of those has requirements in terms of what your location looks like and is approved to do, and those sorts of things. And the Billingsley office represents that main billing building where everything kind of comes out of there. That's our home base. And that building is our certified mental health agency location. And that's where we, again, provide outpatient treatment and diagnostics, but it also houses our administrative team like HR and billing, and is separate from the AIC, which is over on Snoffer Road. There's 2 buildings there. In those buildings, we are approved as an ASP provider, not as a mental health agency. However, where I talk about the community next, mental health can be provided anywhere. So when I mentioned earlier, we go into homes, we push into schools, we push into centers, and we go into work settings and whatnot. AIC would be an example of that. All of the branches of HLC are an example of a community setting. So really, our primary service is community-based. We do very little, I think, in comparison, or I guess in terms of the percentage of service that we provide across the board as an agency, very little of it is actually done in an office environment. It's done where people live and breathe and you know, and act every day. So hopefully those treatments are going to have a bigger impact, I think, and also be able to carry over, because we're teaching in real life settings all the time. So, or treating, whichever the case may be. Our mission, value, and vision, I'm not going to read these to you. They are also in our employee handbook. The important part here is this is a requirement for our governing boards, that you have this information and that you know it. What I tell people is just make sure you know where to find it, because during a survey, they could select you as one of the individuals they're going to interview, and they will ask you, hey, what is the mission statement for your company? And most of us, myself included, are not going to be able to rattle that off. And I don't expect you to, but what I do expect you to know is where to find it. And you can say, oh, normally in our office settings, I would have said, oh, it's up here on this wall. And then I would walk them to that space. And this is what they expect. They don't expect us to know it off the top of our head. For those of us who serve in the community, though, that's kind of hard. It's not like I carry it around with me all the time. And it certainly isn't going to be posted on a wall in the school or the homes of our clients. So you just need to make sure that when we send out the documents that correspond with this presentation, you keep access to those documents and you know where to reference them. And certainly if you are selected for an interview during a survey, then we would be able to prep you ahead of time. And then I understand that it's also on the back of our badges here at our company, which is very smart too. So you should always be able to just flip that and say, oh, here it is. And that will meet all the survey requirements. I do think it's important, though, to understand that we do have very specific goals. And as a company, I am incredibly customer service oriented, and that should be represented in my mission statement, my value statement, and in my goals. And it's very important to me that we view our clients as customers. And if you go to, say, the grocery store, you are a customer of that grocery store. If you can't find something, you would expect someone to help you. If you're having trouble, you would expect someone to help you. You would expect to be greeted. You would be, expect to be respected, and all of these things. And all of that applies here in the mental health world too. So we're going to talk a lot about customer service, because that's probably one of the most important things that I focus on when it comes to service delivery. And I learned this, I think, years ago through, waitressing and all those jobs that you have when you're younger, before you really have a career, or, as you're learning, during your career path as well. But I find that we can sometimes lose sight that it's about the customer. It's about our client. It's not about us. So as much as I would love to say, hey, I really don't, feel like we should have to take this kind of documentation, or whatever the case may be, it's not about me. It's about the client. And as much as I would like to say I'm implementing every procedure, perfectly and with fidelity, my supervisor may come in and give me different feedback. It's not about me necessarily. Of course, we are there as supervisors to help everyone grow within their own professional development and be able to keep improving their skills and application of those skills. But honestly, that's in effort to meet our mission, and that is to serve the child. So the better you are and the more successful you are, the more successful our clients are going to be. And that is how I view everything. Customer service is about the client, but without us being really great supports for you and great supervisors for you, and helping you achieve your goals as employees of our agency, this mission statement will never be met. And so it all ties together. Thanks, Lynn. You can go ahead and move on. So part 2 is going to start out with our core competencies in customer service. I'll try to go through these kind of quickly. It's a long section, and if it gets too long, we can take another break. But core competencies, this is the language that the Mental Health Board will use in terms of our requirements. So what do we say about core competencies? There's a true definition for it, and that's the specific knowledge and abilities identified as the minimum requirements of my job. And in this case, they can vary depending upon your position, of course. But when I talk about what are our minimum requirements at HTS, there are 2 components primarily that fall within that. First is agency-wide knowledge and abilities. And that means it doesn't matter what your position, you should know this information, which is why you're attending today, even if you're not a clinical person and you're an admin person. The other would be your specific job description. Those are the competencies that you are expected to perform and master, and then also even move beyond if you can. So as part of that, though, your licensure or your certifications may be a competency requirement. So I can tell you, for anyone that provides a DD service, you have to have first aid and CPR. In mental health world, that isn't required for everyone, but so many of us cross over these different services that it's just best for everyone to have it in that sense, as an example. These competencies really drive our performance evaluations, and it's important that you guys get familiar with your job description, talk about it openly with your supervisor, make sure you know, hey, what am I going to be assessed on this year during my annual evaluation? And the reason that we talk about these things, or even break them down, so you may have, say, a comment in your job description that says, you'll, complete documentation according to policy. Well, then in terms of actual data to support that, your supervisor is going to be looking at your documentation, making sure that it meets all the, specific criteria, like it's been completed within 24 hours and it's signed and the quality of that documentation is good and whatnot. So that's just an example, but the job description and our agency-wide expectations for your knowledge and abilities are what drive those evaluations. And it's important for everyone to know that at minimum, you are evaluated annually in a formal evaluation, but that doesn't replace any of the ongoing feedback and coaching and working toward completing, I don't know if evals is the right word, but each manager might use a different term, but what I think of as kind of like your quarterly evals, just checking in. Hey, how are you doing? Because by the time your annual eval comes, I want to make sure you've mastered all these things so that you can be recommended for not just a performance review, but a salary review, for example, or an hourly rate review. The two objectives of all these core competencies is to, number one, assist the individuals that we're working with in meeting their goals or their outcomes that they have in mind. And then number two, to meet our mission as an agency. So that kind of goes along with what we were talking about just a moment ago regarding your customer service items. Agency-wide knowledge and abilities. Some of the things that I wanted to make sure we covered is something that we're going to talk about actually as a group. So we're going to, I think, take a few-minute break right here, and then we're going to come back and we're going to have some dialogue about some of these things and not necessarily follow the slides at the moment. So just so that we can have some engagement with everyone. So go ahead and take another 5 minutes and we'll see you in just a little bit.